Historians and archaeologists spend their whole lives interpreting the past, so when they find something they really can't figure out, it's worth paying attention, and maybe helping to solve the mystery.
You might think that real-life archaeology is nothing like what you see in the movies with its treasure maps with spots marked by an X.
An X never, ever marks the spot.
But not so fast. The Copper Scroll is an honest-to-goodness treasure map. It was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it tells the story of exactly how to find major ancient treasures. Sort of. According to the text, 64 treasure hoards were scattered across Jerusalem and the Judean desert, and they were used to hide the most valuable treasure in the world from invaders. That treasure includes not just religious artifacts, but also a huge amount of gold, silver, and coins. The pieces of archaic text that have been translated give rather precise directions. The problem is that the directions are a little too precise and refer to things like water tanks, reservoirs, and underground passages that we have no way of tracing now. Some think the whole thing is fiction anyway. But another school of thought believes the Copper Scroll was a record of the actions of a religious sect living in the city of Qumran, who were responsible for safekeeping Jewish treasure. Scattered across 4 different sites in the Costa Rican jungles are the remains of a civilization that date to between 500 and 1500 AD. In addition to the regular sort of archaeological remains, they also contain around 300 stone spheres known as las Bolas. They're close to perfectly shaped spheres and are all different sizes. Some could fit in your pocket, and others are estimated to weigh somewhere around 15 tons. For hundreds of years, they were buried under dirt, mud, and sediment, and that's kept them safe from all kinds of unsavory characters. That hasn't helped experts figure out much about them, though, and we thus have no clue who made them, when they were made, or what they possibly could have been for. There's no apparent rhyme or reason to the placement of the spheres, most of which are in residential locations. One of the sites has a set arranged in a linear pattern, another has an abnormally large sphere, and a sadly large number have been looted, destroyed, or moved. And that means we don't even know how many there really were. They can't be carbon dated, but based on the layers of sediment they were buried in, it looks like someone was carving them over a period of about 1800 years. Lore says that the gods used them to control the weather, but maybe they were just a sort of divine bocce set. Sometimes incredible discoveries get incredibly boring names, like the Big Circles. Made out of stone and dating from sometime between 2000 and 4500 BC, the Big Circles were first spotted in 1920, but it wasn't until 2014 that archaeologists discovered how weird they are. So far, 12 have been found scattered across Jordan, along with 1 in Syria. They range between 720 and 1,460 feet in diameter, with a rough average height of 3 feet. What's weird is that they're pretty perfectly round, and that there's no entrance to any of them. The fact that there's no entrance puts an end to most of the theories about what they might have been used for. There's no practical reason that you're going to, for example, keep a herd of cattle in an enclosure you'd have to lift them in and out of. The sheer distance between each of the sites is also confusing. It is known, at least, that some of them have been destroyed. The one in Syria was all but demolished by expanding towns, but that hasn't gotten us any closer to figuring out what they were built for. In 2016, archaeologists from the University of Glasgow unearthed a prehistoric site that had already been discovered once. After the Cochno Stone was thoroughly documented in the 1960s, it was reburied to protect it from vandalism. Dated to around 3000 BC, the stone sits next to a housing estate and is said to have some of the best depictions of Neolithic and Bronze Age carvings ever discovered. But we don't know why people went to all the trouble of carving the exquisite markings into relatively soft stone, or what any of it means. The surface of the stone was already mapped before it was defaced by graffiti and people's boots. The goal of the 2016 excavation was to map it more extensively with 3D scanning technology that would allow archaeologists to get a look at the stone as it was originally intended. While we doubt that this is the case, we would love the irony if the carvings turned out to be graffiti from prehistoric hoodlums. How do you say eat at Joe's in Neolithic? Judaculla Rock is named for the Cherokee legend that Judaculla, an ancient giant, was the one who left the markings on the boulder's surface. The tale says that he was jumping from mountain to mountain when he pressed his hand into the stone and left the imprint of his 7 fingers. But aside from that, no one's really sure what the deal is about the North Carolina stone with the prehistoric petroglyphs. Strangely, some of the best images we have of the rock come from the 1930s, when archaeologists filled in the carvings with chalk to show where the markings were. In the decades since, weather has taken its toll on the soapstone boulder, and it's inevitable that at some point the carvings are going to wear away completely. They've already been dated to be between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Not only do we not know what the carvings mean, we're not sure who made them either. Even stranger, there's supposedly 2 other similar stones in the area, but no one can find them anymore. Theories about the rock suggest that it's an ancient peace treaty, religious marker, or even something like the Rosetta Stone, giving us the key to unlocking other languages. Unfortunately, whatever it's unlocking has been so lost to time that we have no idea where to even start, and it might just disappear anyway before we're able to figure it out.
It's a form of communication in some ways. So what is this story? What are they trying to tell?
Miami, Florida is probably the last place you'd expect to find an ancient stone circle that's reminiscent of sites like Stonehenge. But in 1998, construction crews were tearing down 6 blocks of housing to clear space for a few new skyscrapers. In the process, they uncovered a circle of 24 large holes in limestone. Some more digging uncovered a perfect circle that was 38 feet in diameter, dated to around 2,000 years ago, and littered with all kinds of ancient artifacts. Along with animal bones and shark teeth, archaeologists found tools and axe heads made from basalt. That's significant because the closest place to get basalt is hundreds of miles away in what's now Georgia. Further digging led archaeologists to conclude that the site was left behind by the Tequesta Native American tribe, one of the most mysterious peoples to settle in the southern United States. They were a largely nomadic group that managed to survive into the 18th century. There's a lot we don't know about them, including what the deal is with this ancient circle. The site is still being studied, and it's also now preserved by state authorities. If you ever find yourself in Miami anytime soon, you now know you have somewhere cool to visit besides the beach. In 1957, an amateur archaeologist found a small coin in what he thought was a purely Native American site at Naskeg Point in Brooklyn, Maine. Then, in 1974, experts visiting the Maine State Museum announced that it was a Norse coin, and it took another 4 years to date it between 1065 and 1080 AD. The site itself was dated to just after that, when the coin would have logically been in circulation. But the question of just how it ended up in Maine has been hugely debated. Some people insist it's proof of Norse contact with Maine, but since it's the only Norse artifact that's been found there, others say it's a hoax. Still others suggest it might have been carried there as a part of some 12th century trade network. The coin has a mark that's led some to suggest it had been made into a pendant and was brought to the New World that way. If that's true, there's something oddly comforting about the idea that even hundreds of years ago, we were picking up souvenirs, turning them into jewelry, and then losing them. The eerily named Starving of Saqqara is a 2-foot-tall limestone statue that now resides at Concordia University in Montreal. It came to the university from a collection of Mediterranean antiques, but no one has the faintest idea about the statue's origins or what it's supposed to be, even though there's no shortage of experts that have been consulted. Saqqara is the name of an ancient Egyptian burial ground, but no one knows just how the statue came by that name or if the two are really related. Even stranger, a mysterious script was etched into the statue, and no one's been able to even come close to identifying that either. If it's a fake, someone went to a lot of trouble to make up something that's not recognizable as anything of importance. And if it's not fake, then we have a lot to learn. Some places aren't typically on anyone's travel plans. One of those is surely a remote corner of the Southeast Asian country of Laos, about 250 miles outside the capital city of Vientiane. But if you head out into the literal middle of nowhere, you'll discover the Plain of Jars. The sprawling site of hundreds of square miles is filled with thousands of these stone containers. They're in random places, some alone, some in groups, with some up to 9 feet tall. Some have lids, some don't. Some are decorated with carvings, others aren't. At this point, you can probably guess that no one has the slightest idea what the jars were for. One theory says that they were burial sites, or that they were urns for placing a body in to allow it to decompose before the rest of the burial rites were performed. Others say that they're kilns and were used to make building materials. Still others suggest that they were used for brewing rice wine, and that's probably our favorite theory. We're thinking it's either that or the beer pong of the gods. In 1986, construction workers near Chengdu, China uncovered something bizarre, an ancient cache of artifacts that included animal bones and elephant tusks, along with around 200 jade figures, massive bronze artworks, and a life-size statue. Most of the Sanxingdui artifacts appeared to have been damaged, dumped into the massive pits, and buried. Further investigation dated them to around 1200 BC and discovered that they were cast with technology that wasn't thought to have existed at the time. No one's sure how they were made. No forges or foundries were ever found, no tools were uncovered, and in fact, until the discovery, it was thought that Chinese civilization was busy growing up elsewhere. Nor does anyone know why the figures were broken and buried. Traces of similar artwork were found at the nearby Jinsha site, which dates to about 500 years after the burial of the Sanxingdui horde. But still, no one's quite sure exactly what the story is. The pieces have a sort of unhealthy, supernatural look to them, with exaggerated features and almost wing-like ears. It could be the work of ancient aliens, or maybe it's just proof that there's a huge amount we don't know about our own collective history.
On April 15, 1912, the unsinkable Titanic fell to the ocean floor. Today, hundreds of recovered objects tell the story of that tragic night and the souls that were lost to the sea. Here are 13 of the most fascinating. Sitting on the ocean floor, 12,500 feet below the surface, the Titanic is very fragile. The metal of the ship itself is being eaten away by deep-sea bacteria that leave behind crumbling rusticles.
Stalactites of rust dangle from the ship. So fragile, they crumble into a cloud of dust if disturbed.
This makes the idea of raising the whole ship little more than a fantasy. But pieces of the ship have made it to the surface. In 1998, salvage company RMS Titanic Incorporated pulled up a 15-ton section of the wreck covered with debris and sea life. An attempt 2 years earlier failed when a cable snapped mid-recovery. RMS Titanic Incorporated was granted sole rights to draw artifacts from the wreck site in 1994, but was required to stabilize them and forbidden from selling anything. As a result, the Big Piece, as it became known, was cleaned and covered with a protective coating before it went on exhibit in Las Vegas. Today, it's on display in Titanic, the Artifact Exhibition at the Luxor Hotel and Casino. The first-class plates and teacups recovered from the wreckage of the Titanic are beautiful, made from fine china and decorated with gold and expensive blue cobalt. It's easy to imagine a fancy lady and her industrialist husband dining off of these. Second-class passengers aboard the Titanic were also doing all right in the world. However, once cleaned of the deep-water muck, the second-class plates salvaged from the wreck are far less ornate. Their blue floral pattern is nice, to be sure, but doesn't compare to the delicate beauty of the first-class set. Third-class passengers and crew members had no illusions about their place in the Titanic hierarchy. They too ate off dedicated plates, but these were far from the fine hand-painted dinnerware of first-class passengers. Plates salvaged from the Titanic reveal that third-class passengers and crew were served on simple white sets stamped with the red logo of the White Star Line. The menu for the final first-class meal served aboard the Titanic on April 14, 1912 survived in the purse of Ruth Dodge, wife of California banker Dr. Washington Dodge. Dr. Dodge had been receiving medical treatment in France, and a small family was returning to America aboard the liner. The Dodges would have been able to pick from a vast array of foods for their luncheon. These included fussy Edwardian options like eggs argenteuil, which came with delicate asparagus tips and bologna sausage. Hopefully, someone was availing themselves of the extensive selection of cheese and a nice tankard of Munich lager, as, unbeknownst to them, it would have been their last chance to indulge before the tragedy. Ruth, Washington, and their 4-year-old son Washington Dodge Jr. all survived the sinking. One of the most iconic images of the Titanic tragedy is the ship's band standing on deck, playing tunes like the hymn Nearer My God to Thee to keep everyone calm. Titanic survivors confirmed that the band played nearly to the end, though some remembered them playing a more cheerful waltz or newfangled ragtime to keep spirits up.
Till the end, I heard them play, Nearer My God to Thee.
Wallace Hartley played violin in the band and his instrument survived. It was given to Hartley by his fiancée, Mariah Robinson, who watched her husband-to-be set off for a gig on the Titanic ahead of their June 1914 wedding. Hartley died in the shipwreck, but his body was recovered. An inventory of the effects found with him doesn't include the violin, though Robinson later wrote that she was grateful to have received it. After Robinson died in 1939, the instrument went through a series of owners until it was found in an attic in 2004. Testing confirmed that it was indeed Hartley's violin. Seawater had left salt deposits and 2 significant cracks in the body of the instrument. On October 19, 2013, it was auctioned for £900,000 to a private owner. Adjusted for inflation to 2023 values, the violin sold for the equivalent of more than $1.2 million. In 1987, salvagers brought up a rose gold, silver, and diamond bracelet bearing the name Amy. The leather bag it was found in protected it from seawater as well as the microorganisms that devoured other Titanic relics.
The natural process of tanning a leather creates an antibacterial situation so it prevents deterioration.
But who was Amy? It wasn't a common name at the time, at least amongst Titanic passengers. Records indicate that there were only 2 women by that name on the voyage, although it could have been a nickname for another passenger with a similar name. In Titanic, Women and Children First, author Judith Geller theorizes that the bracelet's owner may have been Amy Stanley, a third-class passenger who survived the sinking. However, it would be an oddly fine bit of jewelry for someone with a low-cost ticket, and Stanley isn't known to have mentioned a lost diamond bracelet. To date, no one has been able to definitively identify the mysterious bracelet bearing Amy. The environment in which the Titanic currently lies is subject to strong deep water currents and microbes that consume metal, so it's remarkable that several delicate glass perfume vials survived the trip from the ocean's surface to the sea floor and back up again. In the summer of 2000, a salvage crew recovered a small leather pouch from the wreck. When they brought the bag into a shipboard laboratory, they smelled floral perfume. They eventually found 3 bags containing perfume samples in the wreckage. The satchels were labeled with the name of Adolf Saalfeld, a German Jewish perfumer. Saalfeld, a first-class passenger, was carrying 65 vials of sample scents intended for American clients. Saalfeld survived, but his product went down with the ship. They have a second life, however. The surviving scents formed the basis for the Titanic Legacy 1912 fragrance sold on QVC. In 2017, a waterlogged letter sold for £126,000, or the equivalent of $160,000. Of course, this was no ordinary bit of mail. Not only had the letter in question come from the Titanic, but remarkably, someone managed to fish the still legible document from the ocean and eventually delivered it to its intended recipient. The actual content of the letter, dated just a day before the disaster, isn't especially interesting. The writer, Alexander Oscar Holverson, was a businessman traveling home to New York with his wife Mary. Writing to his mother, Holverson commented on the grand size of the ship.
He wrote, "If all goes well, we will arrive in New York on Wednesday."
He also noted that the immensely rich John Jacob Astor IV deigned to sit on the deck just like normal folk, at least the ones who could spring for a first-class ticket. Astor and Holverson both died in the disaster, but their wives survived.
The whole world stood still that night. Once the lights had gone, the ship had gone, the sound had gone. Oh, it was dreadful.
When Holverson's remains were recovered, the letter was found on his body. Even though it lacked postage and was damaged by seawater, it was delivered to his mother. Though it may not be the most glamorous item recovered from the Titanic wreck, one of the doomed ship's deck bells still carries plenty of historic weight. This humble bronze bell was part of the lookout station on the forward part of the ship. This is where lookout Frederick Fleet would have first spotted the iceberg that would so critically damage the Titanic. He rang the bell 3 times to alert the bridge crew of the looming danger, though calm waters and a dark moonless night meant that Fleet didn't spot the iceberg until it was dangerously close. The bell and Fleet's shout of "iceberg right ahead" couldn't avert disaster.
When you're traveling at 21 or 22 knots and you see iceberg dead ahead, there wasn't enough time to turn.
Fleet survived the Titanic sinking and lived until 1965. His bell, however, went down with the ship until it was recovered in the late 1980s. The Titanic's grand staircase is the stuff of legend. It features prominently in director James Cameron's 1997 mega-hit film Titanic, and a recreation of the grand staircase has pride of place in the Titanic The Artifact exhibition installation in Las Vegas. But we don't know what the grand staircase really looked like. Surviving photos are actually of the staircase from Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. Given the design similarities between the two vessels, it's probably close enough. It certainly was for Cameron, who used the Olympic photos for his movie's set design. Yet, given that the grand staircase was either damaged during the sinking or collapsed into ruin at the shipwreck site, we can't say whether Cameron and his team got it right. But there are pieces of the grand staircase that may have survived. Salvagers recovered a bronze cherub statue like one that would have adorned a first-class staircase, though some researchers suggest that this particular figure came from another, smaller stairway. This carving may bear the marks of the ship's harrowing descent, as its missing left foot may have popped off when the statue was wrenched from its post. As a milliner, Marion meanwhile must have understood fashion. Sure, she was a third-class passenger on the Titanic, but making hats was her business. She may have intended to continue that work in the United States, given the stylish alligator-skin bag she was carrying, which included a reference noting that Meanwell always paid her rent on time. Unfortunately, she didn't survive the sinking. However, many decades later, salvagers recovered her still intact alligator purse from the Titanic debris field. When they opened it, they discovered not only the landlord's endorsement, but also her marriage license. These fragile documents survived in parts because the damaged ship and its contents settled in the deep, dark ocean far from light or oxygen. Meanwhil's high-quality bag, made of thick hide, also helped preserve its contents. Recovered from the wreck site shortly after the liner went down, this unassuming key carries a tag reading Locker 14F Deck. It was found on the remains of Sidney Sidunnery, a young third-class steward, and indicates that Sidunnery would have been on the F deck at some point on the night of the Titanic disaster. Auctioneer Andrew Aldridge went so far as to call Sidunnery a hero, telling the BBC that, "Without a doubt, he saved lives. Here's a man who sacrificed his life to save others." Although there is no eyewitness testimony to any particular acts of heroism on Sidunnery's part, there's no denying that this small locker key is a part of history. In 2016, the key sold for a staggering £85,000. Adjusted for inflation, that comes out to about $140,889 in 2023. Though there's scant evidence that sturdy suitcases or well-traveled valises did much to help people in a practical sense on the night of the sinking, these everyday objects have done much to preserve the history of the Titanic and the people who booked passage on it. Take the suitcase of William Henry Allen, which helped to preserve quite a few of his personal effects, even though Allen, a toolmaker, died in the sinking. Allen was quite stylish, owner of a polka dot scarf and leather dress boots. His suitcase also preserved about 150 documents, though the luggage had been submerged for many years. Inside the suitcase, salvagers also found a wool vest owned by Allen, with its buttons still in place despite passing through about 2.5 miles of icy ocean water to the ocean floor. In 1987, salvagers brought up a leather bag full of jewelry from the wreck site. The night of the sinking, the bag was almost certainly one of many such containers under the protection of the ship's pursers, crew members who were in charge of handling money and safekeeping passengers' valuables. Pursers worked to place the bags on lifeboats, but clearly they didn't all make it to shore in 1912. A century later, the jewels in this particular bag were part of a glittering exhibit of Titanic valuables. They include a unique necklace made with gold nuggets. No one is sure who it belonged to, but speculation has landed on Margaret Brown, otherwise known as the unsinkable Molly Brown.
Here comes that vulgar brown woman. Quickly get up before she sits with us.
Besides being the child of working-class immigrants who made it as a socialite and philanthropist, she was the wife of mining magnate J.J. Brown, who could have given her the necklace.